So today we're going to talk about commercial vehicles, Studebaker commercial vehicles. As I'm sure many of you are aware, our Keep On Truckin', the American pickup truck exhibit is going on in the museum's upper gallery and also on the museum's turntable in the AM General Atrium. This is one of the first times we've been able to showcase our entire Studebaker truck collection as a portion of our feature exhibit. We're delighted to be able to do that. But I didn't want you guys to go through there thinking that just the 5 trucks we have on display up there represent Studebaker's entire commercial vehicle history, because really, commercial vehicles are at the very roots of what's made Studebaker such a successful manufacturer. We go back to the horse-drawn days, and really if you look at Studebaker's trade catalogs from that time period, you'll see that most of their model lineup was really just chock full of commercial vehicles, from heavy-duty construction wagons to delivery vehicles like this, the American Express Company. I'm sure they didn't leave home without it. It's obviously a fine vehicle. And it's amazing how many companies we recognize as we were going through the pictures preparing this exhibit that they're still around today. We see even past when Studebaker was building automobiles, they were still heavily marketing their horse-drawn commercial vehicles. We see this trade catalog from 1912. Driving wagons, road wagons, farm trucks, farm wagons, log wagons, a few other passenger vehicles on here, but delivery wagons and just about anything you could use in the form of commerce or industry, the Studebaker Corporation was happy to sell you at one of their dealerships worldwide. So you see the Nabisco Company, that time known as the National Biscuit Company. Obviously, you need a biscuit, it says so right there, and I wonder how many biscuits they could actually put into a Studebaker or a Studebaker delivery wagon here. And I always marvel at the craftsmanship on these. We tend to think of, we see the vehicles, 100 plus years after they were manufactured, and the paint's dull or they get restored. But I mean, just look at the elaborate striping on the wheels and axles here. These things were very aesthetically pleasing vehicles when they rolled out the Studebaker assembly line. Now, I imagine after a month or two of usage behind a horse or two that this deteriorated dramatically. But suffice to say, when they were new, they looked quite nice. So I mentioned the dump wagon, and indeed we do have a Studebaker dump wagon in our collection here. Just the multitude of variations that Studebaker built during their horse-drawn years was amazing. You could get, the steel body garbage dump wagon, and then they would have another thing, something would have, the farm wagon had dozens of variations from different track sizes to different, you could get a flared bed on it if you were loading grain. You could get high sides, low sides, different axle combinations. Just really an amazing array of vehicles. We've never done the math to find out, to do the multiplication to find out how many they did, but it was well into the tens of thousands permutations you could order from your friendly Studebaker dealer. And the street cleaning department, this is one of my favorites here because, I mean, obviously this thing is brand new, because let's face it, the street cleaning department, you're getting it from both sides, not just the horses, but what you're dealing with there too. But you can see the little Studebaker label right there on the side of the tank. And people often ask us where this is, and I don't believe this picture is actually taken in South Bend. But what would often happen is they take delivery of a new vehicle and they'd have a photographer take a nice picture, and Studebaker would end up with a copy which still survive in our archives. So that's where a lot of the pictures you see today from the horse-drawn era come from that collection. So in case you didn't need convincing to the Studebaker that you needed a Studebaker vehicle, they were happy to point out all the virtues of various Studebakers, what our dealers say about it, what the men who use it say. Apparently the women didn't say anything about it, but it's important that we know what the men say. But regardless, we have used a Studebaker wagon for a long time, and it beats anything I ever hitched a team to. Well, I don't need any more convincing, do you? But as we get into the automobile age, Studebaker, given their strong history of commercial vehicles in the horse-drawn era, they really didn't jump into the self-propelled vehicle era regarding commercial vehicles with both feet. During their electric vehicle era, that's where they were building commercial vehicles. And when you consider from 1902 to 1911, Studebaker only built just under 2,000 electric vehicles of all types, so they weren't exactly a mass producer. But we see they were, the term truck, see is right there on the, sorry, I lost my button here. Truck delivery wagons for the motor cars. We see other electric commercial vehicles. They point out all the different things comprising delivery wagons, trucks from 800 to 10,000 pounds capacity. And notice the name here. We are not looking, at this time it was still been known as the Studebaker Brothers Manufacturing Company, but the self-propelled vehicles were marketed under the Studebaker Automobile Company. Central offices in Cleveland, Ohio, factories in South Bend, Indiana. Why Cleveland, you might ask? Well, some of Studebaker's early partners in the automobile era were actually companies that were headquartered in Cleveland. So it worked out that way. And I think maybe, too, you sound a little more multinational or widespread if you can list your offices and manufacturers as being in several major U.S. cities. But what could you get? Well, you could get any number of things, mostly built on the same basic chassis, but with different body configurations. Say anything from suitable for medium delivery, and this is just one capacity, the 2,500 pound capacity. In this catalog, there was 1,000 pound, 5,000 pound, 10,000 pounds. But if you read the specs carefully there, they were certainly easier to use than a horse and certainly more reliable, but you weren't going to get there terribly fast. I think we see here, what do we see? 9.25 miles per hour. And, apparently putting that quarter on there, that was an extra feature as well. Well, if it only goes 9 miles an hour, I'm not even going to bother. But wait, it goes 9.25? Sign me up. We see, and not just for cargo, we see the 14-passenger enclosed omnibus too. They were also building passenger vehicles as well, but still on their commercial truck platforms. So rest assured that should you require medical attention and you could not get to the hospital by yourself, a Model 2004A Studebaker electric ambulance could come out to pick you up and could get you safely to your house to the local care facility at 9.25 miles an hour. Let's ponder that for a moment. I'd probably see if the horse had been fed and might take my chances that way. But yet an ambulance would come into duty for many other ways. Not just humans require medical care. We see we have an injured elephant here, likely from a circus that was coming through town. Well, the Studebaker Electric came through and got the elephant to the medical facility in time, and thankfully the elephant had signed up during the open enrollment, so he was covered under health insurance. But we also see this listing here, too, of all the various companies. And let's face it, some rather prestigious names here. We've got Tiffany & Company, who purchased Studebaker commercial vehicles. Where was it in here? I think, Anheuser-Busch, I'm sorry, looking down there. Gimbel Brothers of New York, the Boston Electric Light Company as well. And so, and adding up the numbers here, I was thinking, we've often seen the figure, it's 1,811 Studebaker vehicles, electric vehicles were built. And we may have to go back and double check that, because literally this morning as I was putting the slide, I'm like, well, wait a minute, okay, they sold 20 here, they sold 31 here. The numbers didn't quite jive. Either their passenger car electric division, electric sales were very low, or maybe that was just passenger electric vehicles, but that's the number that Studebaker always published, so we'll go with that until proven otherwise. So I'm certain many of you remember and likely shopped at Robinson's during the day, but they also used a Studebaker. This appears to be a Flanders 20 derived commercial vehicle, and one of the first self-propelled commercial vehicles Studebaker built, but they actually were not really, devoted to doing gasoline chassis commercial vehicles during this time. This would have been about from 1910, 1911. What you will see during this early era is, while Studebaker was marketing commercial vehicles, and they even had a dedicated commercial car album, they were still very much based on the automobiles that were already in production at the time. We see a wide range of commercial vehicles, again based, they really started marketing the separate line in 1916. You see the various different models here. We have a better view coming up here as well. There we go. I'd love to find one of these one-ton express models today, again, based off Studebaker's 1916 passenger car line. And also, we have up here the one-ton stake bed model. And you'll notice, too, you aren't afforded a lot of weather protection in these cheaper models. They had more enclosed vehicles available, and in today's edition of Euphemism Theater here we have finished with storm curtains. Because of storms coming up, that's exactly what I want surrounding me when I'm hauling cargo to market there. I'd probably opt for a model with doors and windows if that was at all possible. Well, Studebaker commercial division really only from about 1916 to about 1919, 1920 or so, and then they kind of discontinued things for about a decade. The commercial vehicles you would see were more homemade units. This is a Studebaker Special 6, and this building, some of you may recognize this building from South Bend area. Does anyone any ideas what that building is in the background? Freeman Spicer, yes. At that time, it was just known as the Studebaker Service Department, but the little address there gives us away. But a Studebaker Special 6, likely a roadster, that they had a homemade or possibly an outside company just built a little pickup truck bed on the back of it. Now, I'm sure many of you have never seen the inside of a police car, and if those of you have, well, that's your business. But Studebaker was also, you could buy a car with just a chassis, and then an outside firm would fit the body, and that appears to be the case with this model right here. About a mid-20s Studebaker, looks like a big 6 chassis, but someone's fitted the paddy wagon outfit on the back. That could very well be. We did not have a location noted for that. We see the police light right there, but yeah, it may very well be. And if any people familiar with the history of our police department can identify the uniforms or anything like that, please talk to us after the show. But we get into the late 20s, and Studebaker starts thinking, well, maybe we should revisit the commercial vehicle market. And this was likely late 20s. Studebaker had just purchased the Pierce Arrow Corporation, a luxury vehicle manufacturer who also had a commercial vehicle presence. They were introducing a new line with the Erskine to try and crack the lower price field. So this seemed like a good time as Studebaker was spreading its wings to get into more commercial car markets. You see, this is about 1930. Studebaker kind of eased their way into this because they were producing, as I mentioned, some of their passenger car chassis in the late 20s, about 1928, 29, for commercial use, but they weren't really building dedicated truck bodies. These were for like buses or other things that would have custom coachwork on them for the commercial field. But about 1929, 1930, Studebaker introduced, at that time it was the S-Series models. And these are beginning to take a new direction where they have dedicated truck styling. There's many different bodies available, and these were available in tonnages, believe it or not, up to 4 tons capacity or classifications. And I just love this literature cover too. They were investing some resources into their truck field, really trying to make a go of it. But at this time too, Studebaker, again, this illustration is from literature right after they went through receivership. They weren't selling many cars during this era. They weren't selling very many trucks either. And despite the vehicle's relative merits, whether it was a good truck or maybe not as good as some of the others, it was just a very tough time for anyone to sell new vehicles. And the Studebaker commercial division just really kind of, I think it was maybe just from inertia, we have it, we might as well see if we can kind of make something of it. But this is later, I mentioned 1934, 1935, Studebaker is still trying to compete in the wide variety of markets from the lightest duty truck. The Studebaker, and again, I just love the artwork in these. And for a vehicle that, let's face it, the trucks of this era did not go very fast, but they want you to make it look like it's going very quickly down the road. Price means a lot, but it's performance that counts indeed. And Studebaker some of their lighter model used Studebaker power plants, but the heavier models, Studebaker was actually purchasing engines from outside suppliers. They used some Waukesha engines. Later on, they used Hercules engines, as Studebaker just wasn't producing an engine that they felt was suitable for heavy truck use at this time. You see a little different. I believe these are 1935 models, but again, I'm always struck by, I always think these are very attractive trucks, especially when we consider a rugged commercial vehicle, but you see kind of echoing the Studebaker 1935 automobile styling with the horizontal louvers and the bills, and even little touches like it looks like the chrome-plated headlight buckets there. And I don't I'm sure that was not standard across the truck line, but sometimes Studebaker would offer like deluxe equipment packages where you could dress up your trucks a little bit, and that may be what is the case here. And again, the Quality Service Laundry. Does anyone know, is that from the area? Does that ring any bells with anyone? Hearing none, we'll say it was from somewhere else. In 1936, Studebaker really reasserted and kind of redesigned their truck lines. New styling came across the line. And for the first, Studebaker actually applied names to their truck series. They had Ace, Boss, Mogul, and the big one here, this was the Chief. And we can see they even had special logos and iconography on the trucks themselves to actually identify them. So really, kind of a new territory for Studebaker. They had both the conventional cab models, as you see here, and also the cab forward models. And these cab forward models are highly sought after today, and we do have one on exhibit downstairs in the basement of the museum, a stake bed model. Despite the truck having kind of the family resemblance, these are actually put together very differently. The conventional cab trucks, the cabs are all steel and very rugged units. The cab forward models were made just like the cars were in the 20s in that they're framed in wood and then sheathed over with metal. A lot of people embark on an ambitious restoration of the cab forward models only to complete it many years ahead or many years behind and many dollars over budget and swear they would never do one again. So it's very rare to find someone who's actually attempted to restore two of these cab forward models. But they had a lot of practical advantages as well, and not the least of which was maneuverability. We see down here, they point out the cab forward, because it's a much shorter, you're basically sitting right over the axle. The engine is kind of resting right next to you. But in urban areas where quarters were tight, there was a lot of advantages to the cab forward models. And indeed, Studebaker, although they weren't selling a lot of those, they really stuck with the design until they discontinued these models in 1940. So we mentioned some recognizable names. If we need, it's not Starbucks, but I'd like to think maybe Hills Brothers was the Starbucks of the day. As we can see, a lot of coffee on the back of that truck. And I've never driven one of these, and there aren't that many opportunities, but also if you're over about 5'9" or so, you're not going to fit into one of these very well. They're very cramped. Ergonomics was not really thought of. This is where the pedals and the steering wheel are going to fall, so you're going to figure out how to drive it. I have had to steer our museum cab forward around, and suffice to say, about 30 minutes of yoga before you get in there, if you're over 6 feet tall, would benefit you. You see a conventional cab model here. This is a 1938 model. You can see very rugged. These hood ornaments are among my favorite as well. It's the Studebaker logo with a nice winged motif to it. And unfortunately, today, the hood ornaments did not tend to have a very long life from new. But I believe someone is actually reproducing those. And maybe if you want one for your mantelpiece, we can put you in touch with who has those. And even, too, I like how they're finally really branding their vehicles. You know it's a Studebaker now because it says so in big letters right on the side. And Studebaker was really taking a firm run at the light truck market. The Coupe Express model debuted in 1937, and this is a 37 Coupe Express. And we often hear the phrase, Studebaker was ahead of their time, and this is one area where you could say, yeah, they were really forward-thinking about this. It was based on the passenger car styling. It did not share the common styling with the larger trucks. It was based on the 37 Dictator. In fact, just about everything from here forward, sheet metal-wise, was from the Dictator. But it was classified as a half-ton truck, and very stylish, very pretty trucks, yet they weren't big sellers. I believe 37 was the high water mark. They sold 3,500, 4,000 or so. These are highly sought-after trucks today, and if anyone has gone shopping for a Coupe Express lately, let's just say you might want to bring the largest checkbook you have. In part to we appreciate them now after Ford broke ground with the Ranchero and Chevy with the El Camino. We became more accustomed to passenger car-styled pickup trucks. But also, too, it's a rarity. These were never produced in large numbers, and then a lot of them just got used up through World War II when no new commercial vehicles were available. So, if you have a good Coupe Express in your garage, by all means, hang on to it. This is the picture at the outset, one of my favorite commercial vehicle pictures. This is Studebaker's entire 1937 truck line. Everything from the, see the Coupe Express sitting right there with its Caravan top there, and all the other models from the smallest up to the largest, and even a 37 President Woody. Somebody going to ask you what's the story behind that car, and I wish I could tell you. Obviously they built one because we're looking at it right there. Whether it was a prototype or a custom bodywork, we're not 100% sure. We're also afraid to tell you I don't believe that vehicle survives to this day. We'd love to find it if it does. If anyone knows where a 37 President Woody is, please talk to us after the show. Oh, and the other question too, got asked, where was this picture taken? Well, this is at the proving ground, and I believe this is actually taken from the roof of the garage, and you're looking northeast there because you can see there's State Road 2, there's the fence posts, that's the driveway, basically where it still is today. The clubhouse will be off to the camera, off the camera left there. Yes, yes, that is a gas pump right there. Wonder if there's an underground storage tank still there, but we're guessing that's not our problem anymore. When new styling came out in 1938, courtesy of the Raymond Loewy Studios, again, the first vehicles that Studebaker had designed by Raymond Loewy and his team, they updated the Coupe Express design as well. And the 38s kind of worked better on the car than the truck for a couple reasons. The truck, you needed to put the spare somewhere. The side mounts on the shorter wheelbase used for the Coupe Express sit up really high. It was almost like they got the truck done and thought, okay, what are we going to do with the spare tire? Oh crud, this is how this has to work, because you have to have wheel jounce clearance in there, and if you put the well in here for the spare tire, you have to put it forward enough, because if you put it too far back, you can't open the front door. So not the best spare tire treatment on the 38s, but I feel they're very handsome trucks nonetheless. And also, as a dog owner, I'm a sucker for any Studebaker picture that has a dog in it. We get into 39. This is my second favorite photo in this entire presentation. We see the 39 Coupe Express, again, with all the commercial vehicles in Studebaker's line. Now, we'd like to think that really Studebaker was going great guns in the commercial business. Not really. They were doing a little bit into the early 30s, but they were still not very happy with their commercial vehicle sales. The Coupe Express, for a handsome vehicle, just under 1,000 were built in 1939, certainly not the volume they were looking for. And the bigger trucks as well were really struggling to penetrate the truck market. Studebaker kind of had to decide whether they were going to get in or out of the pool, and they really took a step back, and their next models really charted a new path for the commercial vehicle division. And that was the M-Series line, which debuted as a 1941 model. With the M's, Studebaker, again, rejiggered their commercial vehicle line. They decided, we're not going to try and compete in the larger 3- and 4-ton truck market. We're going to focus on the light-duty trucks from the half-tons, basically up to the 2-ton models. They took advantage of the new for 1941 Champion by using a lot of the basic parts on the Champion for the cab of the M-Series. If you look, actually, if you check out the exhibit upstairs, we've got a 41 Champion coupe delivery right next to the M-Series. And you'll see a lot of details, everything from many of the basic door stampings, the windshield. A lot of the details are exactly the same as the 41 Champion, just modified for truck use. They utilized a lot of economies of scale as well by using other parts, like the bumpers came from the 3940, I believe it was, Commander and President. The running boards were the same from side to side, so you just had to have one stamping to make running boards for both. The front fenders interchange front and rear from side to side. A lot of very economical trucks, very rugged trucks, and really very commercially successful trucks. After a slow start, World War II kind of intervenes, but Studebaker suddenly found a great market with their M-Series trucks. When World War II came calling, Studebaker was called upon to produce US 6x6 Army trucks. And as part of the haste to get those to market, each individual manufacturer was allowed to use their own cabs. So Studebaker just adapted the M-Series cab, and you can always tell a Studebaker truck, and did I put that, yeah, here we go. You can always tell the Studebaker branded ones because they have a lot more windshield rake than the ones made by General Motors, and I think Rio was the other supplier during World War II. The windshields have a lot more slant on the M's, and the M-Series base US 6s, and again, you can always look for the little check mark on the air pillar where it hits the cowl, and that'll tell you it's a Studebaker every time. Once World War II wound down, the government decided to loosen some restrictions on civilian production, so a limited number of M series were allowed to be put on the domestic market in late 1945. And I love this shot because you see the weasels going down the line on one side and the M series models coming down the other side. And these were basically civilianized Army trucks because you'll note it's got the military-style swing-out windshield that's hinged on the top. You still see some of these around. They didn't build very many. I think it was maybe 1,000 or so, right around that figure. But again, with car and truck-starved America after the war, a lot of these trucks got used up. So you don't see very many of them. They only produce them in a very limited model line. I think it was just the M15. You might have been able to get it in a different wheelbase or two. But the 45s, you can always spot them with the swing-out windshield. That's a sign that you might have a rare truck on your hands. But after the war, the M series really found a new footing. Studebaker was actually thinking about replacing the M series immediately after the war, but they were trying to get everything else in production. The new trucks that they had in mind weren't quite ready. They needed to get the new 47 passenger cars off the ground, so they decided to keep the M series going for a while. And they were producing 40, 50,000 trucks a year right after World War II, and that's why you still see a lot of M series today, and with good reason. They were producing a lot of trucks across all the half-ton all the way up through the 1.5 and 2-ton models. Remember this picture, we'll come back to this later. Of course, many local industry and businesses in South Bend here too, solid construction. Many people, I'm sure, remember Studebaker trucks being used, of course, by many municipalities in the area, but also many companies. And I've been told that a number of companies, even the Yellow Pages, would advertise, we use Studebaker trucks in their Yellow Pages listing. And solid construction was one of them. Well, the trucks that were intended to come out right after World War II, they had to wait a little bit. The 2R series waited until the 1949 model year. And that was really the next design for Studebaker. In many respects, it was kind of the last all-new truck design for Studebaker. This was designed by Raymond Loewy Studios. Robert Burke, the chief designer for Loewy's team, handled much of the design work for the 2R. Well, as it stood originally, it was designated the R series. You may have wondered why. Okay, we've talked about the S, the T series, the JKLs, the M series. Why is it a 2R? Well, originally, the R series, which you see right here, was planned for after World War II. And the R series was to incorporate a number of things, including torsion bar suspension, as was Studebaker's passenger car line. So these trucks were engineered for torsion bar suspension. Well, that never came to pass for the passenger cars or the trucks, so they had to do some redesigning on the trucks, and they decided to put them off for a couple of years. But if you can see the differences between the trucks here, notice you got the character crease that goes all the way back into the door. The production trucks don't have that. And again, the cowl is a lot wider at the bottom in the R series. You can't really tell from this picture, but the fender goes all the way back to the edge, the trailing edge of the bed. On the production models, it cuts off, and you can see about a foot or so of the bed. I don't know for sure. I'm guessing that the width here was necessary to accommodate the torsion bar suspension. It's not often that you see someone willingly going in and making it, well, we've got this truck, well, let's put less room in the cab. That's not something that usually happens. And if you've driven an R-Series truck, you would have had to change some other things too. I wonder how it laid out in there did that extra room translate onto more foot room? Did they have the cab layout different from one model to the next? We don't really know, unfortunately. This is actually a wooden mock-up. They did build one running prototype, but that does not survive to the present day. So, boy, looks like Easter morning with all the brightly colored trucks of Easter this year. This is one of our earliest color photos we have in the collection, but this is out at the Chippewa Avenue plant, and you can see, judging by the number of trucks going by, the 2R series was a pretty successful line, and it was. Studebaker 49, 50, 51, 52, they were selling a lot of trucks, not just the half-ton, but all models across the line. As mentioned, these were built out at the Chippewa Avenue plant, built in 1940 for military production, and Studebaker, now they had a brand new plant on their hands where they could they had their truck plants out. the most modern building in the Studebaker complex, air conditioned, everything's on one story, and a great way to hope for the all new record volumes for their truck line, taking place right out there at Chippewa. Series actually belongs to one of our board presidents, Mike Kinzicki, and help us out too. Just another of the interesting options, the caravan top. Just a little framework that fits into the stake pockets on the bed. You can have a nice covered area back there, and this is a genuine Studebaker accessory, and one of the many interesting accessories they offered during that time. Another, and I don't know if you can see it on here just well, but a vestige of earlier times. Two of our trucks have actually a crank receptacle right in the front of the grill panel. I don't know if anyone has ever had to crank start a 2R truck. I would probably try push starting it before I'd have to figure out how to use the crank, but every 2R truck you see has a little orifice up front there, supposedly to accommodate the cranking. Another neat feature of the 2Rs was what Studebaker called lift-the-hood accessibility. Now this was no just marketing ploy. If you've ever had to go under your dashboard of your car to replace a wire that's burned out or a light, you didn't have to do that with the 2Rs because they cleverly designed the dashboard so the back of the dash opens up to under the hood, so you can get at your instruments, all the wiring, just by lifting the hood, and some models taking off the little access panel. Unfortunately, I have heard reports that if you have several rodents who like to take up residency in your garages, that's also a great place to find kind of like a rodent condominium up there on that little shelf. So I would suggest if you're storing your 2R outside, you might want to look at getting a cat as well. And of course, as we mentioned, I don't want you to think that Studebaker was just building pickup trucks. They're producing trucks of all models. You see the 2R with the fifth wheel hitch on the back in various configurations, wheelbases from 112 up to 195 inches. You could get different brake options, different transmissions, two-speed rear axle, pretty much anything you needed to make the truck go. Studebaker was happy to say. And a few updates. And I'll just point out a few of the details. The 2Rs didn't change hardly at all from 49 to 52. Studebaker passenger car sales were slowing down, and this is kind of one of the tragedies of Studebaker history, is they really never capitalized on its success on the 2R line. In 54, they went to the one-piece windshield, a slightly revised grille. 55, they finally made the V8 engine available in the truck line. Again, another kind of curiosity. They have the brand new V8 in 1951. It took 4 model years until they finally got it down to the pickup line. You could get it on some of the very biggest models in 54, but what took them so long to introduce their newest, greatest engine into the pickup truck models? Yeah, that's red. Studebaker was also trying to react. The competition was introducing new truck models in the 50s, trying to make basically an 8-year-old cab design look new again. There's only so much they can do, but they beefed up the hood, started getting brighter paint schemes in the 50s. See the deluxe trucks right here. The new, this is how you can tell starting in 57, they had the fiberglass, kind of the big beefy grille. And that was actually one of the Studebaker's first uses of fiberglass in production. The 55 President Speedster used some, actually it's Royalite for the instrument panel, but this was actually a fiberglass molding that was supposed to serve as the grille. And again, Studebaker was trying to make their old models look new again. They also tried a few other things. 4-wheel drive came to the line in 58. 1958, imagine that. Go and get your Studebaker 4x4. Certainly a rugged-looking unit. But let's just say that even though the realities of Studebaker's finances precluded really making drastic changes, we have an insight as to what Studebaker may have had in mind. We took in a collection of drawings by Studebaker designer Ted Peach a few years ago, and he spent a lot of time sketching some new ideas for what Studebaker trucks might have looked like in the late 1950s. These are all dated in December of 57, some might be January of 58. There's kind of an interesting look at what Studebaker had the resources, what their next generation of commercial vehicles might have looked like. You can see very almost a kind of a semi look to this one right here. Again, more takes on that same thing. And apparently remembering that, boy, we had a lot of success in the cab over market too. Maybe it's time to revisit some cab-forward vehicles. But sadly, Studebaker did not have the resources to pursue any of these options, and they were still looking at ways to kind of inject life into the truck division without spending any money. The Scotsman, 1958 Scotsman here. And I must admit a minor bit of embarrassment. I sat there staring at this. It's like, boy, this building looks familiar. I think I know. Gosh, I can't quite place it. Anyone know where this is in South Bend here? Is that? Yes, you're right. And it looks familiar because I got married in that church. But to be fair, I didn't spend much time outside looking at it. And there was no Scotsman parked in front the entire time that I was there to get married. Well, the Scotsman was Studebaker's attempt at the bare-bones basic transportation model in 1957. They continued it in 1958. And actually, the Scotsman was a tremendous success. They sold, about 20,000 Scotsmans between 1957 and 58. And when you consider that they were only producing 80,000 cars in 57, less than that in 58, they're like, hey, something's working here for us. Let's look at this deeper. So they decided, well, let's try and make a Scotsman pickup. And the same theme, a stripped down model that's very basic. They went back and dug out the old 2R series grill, just took off everything that you could possibly take off the truck and still hope that people would buy it. No hood ornament. This is actually a decal. One of the first use of actually exterior automobile decals made by the three importers. You could get it in any of three engine combinations. And really, if you think about it, the Scotsman was a heck of a deal, but unfortunately the Scotsman truck was not anywhere as successful as the Scotsman car. And even in 1959, they started making the more expensive truck trim pieces optional on the Scotsman. It kind of begs the question, why in the first place? Because you have a cheap model that is valued being cheap, and yet you're trying to make it, you're charging people more to make it look like the thing. I'm not sure how that calculus sorted out, but obviously someone thought it was a good idea. Well, finally in 1960, Studebaker had a way to introduce a new light truck design, and that was with the Champ. And again, kind of like the Coupe Express with car-based styling, the Champ borrowed many of the components from the Lark sedan, and of course the familiar Lark grille, fenders and everything else in the cab. And suddenly Studebaker had a new truck style. And the Champ, really by truck standards by this time, was, gathered some sales. And people were even willing to overlook that, kind of the awkward sheet metal that was normally covered up by the bumper on the Lark. Well, that kind of got exposed because the truck rode higher. But the Champ sold pretty well by the standards that Studebaker was accustomed to. And even, this is probably the rarest of all Champ trucks. This is they call this the E9 model. And it was only available for export, and this is a 61 model. You can always tell the 61s because the trim jumps up at the front fender. But this is basically a Lark, literally a Lark passenger car with a pickup truck box on the back. And they designated it the E9. Studebaker truck, they started their E series in 1955, and then everything else was just like E3, E4, E5 after that for the various years. I've never seen one of these in person. I wonder if any survive, but just another curious case of Studebaker looking in any way possible to sell some new trucks. Now, I was staring at this picture earlier because I was trying to slot it roughly where it was supposed to go in chronologically here. And this is where it gets tough with Studebaker, because you have to have a very trained eye to identify the larger Studebaker trucks from about 58, 59 up through the end, because frankly the trucks did not change very much at all. Studebaker wasn't selling very many, but they didn't really want to abandon the market and was putting a lot of their efforts into more engineering rather than cosmetic changes. And I also love this shot too. This is, I don't know if you can see it up there, this is the Place building, which I believe is where the parking lot, the sales, used car sales of Gates downtown, just north of Western Avenue, I think is where that actually sat there too. You can just see the sign for the LaSalle Hotel back there as well. But what Studebaker was investing in? Well, let's look at putting some diesel engines in our trucks. And Studebaker was one of the first, if not the first, major manufacturer to put diesel in its lighter duty truck models. And it started in 1962. They used Detroit diesels, both 3 and 4 cylinder models. This is not Studebaker's first go around with diesel production in their trucks. Believe it or not, in 1937, Studebaker had a diesel truck model. They only sold, I believe it was 24 of them that year, so the diesel line was, they didn't think, oh, this is really worth pursuing. But they came back to it in the 60s, and again, areas where Studebaker really kind of looking to where can we innovate that will give us the most bang for our buck, and they thought that was with diesels. You might say this model looks sawed off in the front because quite literally it was. They called it the 96 BBC model, and what the BBC stood for was bumper to back of cab. Some states have overall length restrictions on semi-tractor trailer combos. If you can make a shorter cab, you can put more cargo devoted in the back behind the fifth wheel. So this was Studebaker's way of introducing an ultra-short model that would satisfy all the restrictions. I think it was, oh gosh, was it Nebraska or Iowa or someone that had the shorter restriction than every other state around there, and there were various ways to do that. But this was one way Studebaker addressed this. Another model that they also introduced around this time was an expando chassis, which basically, trailer toter is another way to do it, but you could lengthen the wheelbase when you did not have a load, when you were picking up like a house trailer or something like that. You could shorten the wheelbase through a fairly simple procedure, and suddenly you had a tractor trailer rig. Again, another innovation courtesy of Studebaker, although that wasn't entirely their own development. A Studebaker dealer, I think it was in Kansas, actually developed the concept initially, and then Studebaker took it over from there. And those expando conversions were done over in Elkhart. Another new innovation was Studebaker's fiberglass bed and cargo bodies that they introduced for the 1964 model year. And everything from here back was made of fiberglass. I'd like to think that the Avanti experience, they thought that maybe fiberglass is a way to look at for the truck bed. Very durable, doesn't rust, and if any of you are Studebaker owners, you know that doesn't rust, and Studebaker is not something that goes together very often. Very few of these were built because, let's face it, by this time Studebaker was not selling very much of anything, and I have not seen one of these out in the wild. I think I've heard that some might be out there, but I have never actually seen one in person. But the fiberglass bed's kind of the last production innovation that Studebaker introduced at this time. But let's to think that, again, Studebaker didn't just throw up their hands and say, gosh, we don't know what to do. They were always thinking of something. And this is actually a truck prototype that has survived, and it's actually downstairs in the museum's lower level. Studebaker was looking at ways to produce like an urban truck, truck for the urban market. Westinghouse had involvement with some similar projects. But how do you build a really inexpensive truck? Well, this truck has all flat sheet metal. The only compound curves are the wheel arches and the the windshield headers, built from just Studebaker production components, and even the bumpers on it are straight off the zip van and some of the other truck markets. But again, Studebaker always innovating for new ways to find a market. Unfortunately, this was right close to the end of shutting down production, so it went. When Studebaker closed its South Bend plant in December of 1963. And by some miracle, most prototypes get scrapped. This one survived. It's a very long, convoluted story how it ended up in our collection, but it is here, and we are delighted to have it to show really kind of the last chapter in Studebaker truck history. So with that, does anyone have any questions?